The painting on the lid does something to you before you have even lifted the flap. A Spitfire caught at the top of a banking turn, the channel grey and distant below. A Lancaster held in crossed searchlight beams over a city already burning. A Tiger tank grinding forward through winter mud. The figures at its flanks reduced to silhouettes. Roy Cross painted those lids as though the history on them was still unresolved. And for a child standing at a Woolworths counter with the box in his hands, it wasn't. Only then do you open it. A grey plastic sprue tree hung with parts so small you hold them to the light to understand what you are looking at. The cement smell reaches you at the same moment, from that small silver tube that finds its way onto your fingers and stays there. The kit is the delivery mechanism. The painting already made the promise. For 30 years, one factory in South London kept it. 20 million kits a year. 3/4 of every model kit sold anywhere in Britain carrying the same name. Today, the building is gone. The company that filled it failed not once, but twice. It passed through the hands of owners who valued it on paper without understanding what it meant in practice. And a generation of British children grew up, grew old, and watched the thing they loved most on a Saturday morning disappear so quietly that most of them never even noticed it leaving. This is how that happened. Nicholas Cove is a Hungarian-born businessman operating in London in the late 1930s, and he is thinking about something that almost no entrepreneur ever thinks about. Not the product, not the price, not even the customer. He is thinking about the directory listing. In an era before television advertising, before the radio jingle, before any of the mechanisms that now push a brand in front of a buyer, the alphabetical trade directory is the shop window. It is how a business gets found. Companies at the front of the list get called first, inquired about first, given the business first. A name beginning with A reaches customers that a name beginning with W never sees. Cove understands this with the clarity of a man who has thought it through from first principles. And so when he names his new company, he chooses deliberately. He wants to be near the front. He wants to be found. He calls it Airfix. The product he starts with has nothing to do with aircraft, nothing to do with scale models or plastic or the childhoods of a generation. Airfix, in 1939, makes inflatable rubber toys. The kind of thing you find in seaside shops in the summer, cheap and cheerful and gone from memory by autumn. The summer of 1939 is the last summer that feels like a normal one. Then war arrives, the rubber supply disappears, and the toy business is finished overnight. Cove does not close. He watches. He waits. And in 1947, 2 years after the armistice, he purchases his first injection molding machine. His opening move with that machine is about as unglamorous as manufacturing gets. He starts producing plastic combs. Practical, mass market, purchased without thought in every household in Britain. Within a few years, he is the country's largest comb manufacturer. That fact is worth pausing on. The man who will come to define British childhood for 4 decades. The man whose factory will run through the night producing Spitfires and Lancasters by the million. He starts by making combs. But what the comb business teaches him cannot be untaught. A single injection molding machine, given the right steel tool, will reproduce any shape with a fidelity that is almost miraculous, and at a unit cost that approaches zero once the initial tooling is paid for. The machine does not care what it makes. That question is entirely up to the man who commissions the mold. In 1949, a company called Ferguson provides the answer. They manufacture the TE20, the compact grey tractor then reshaping British agriculture one field at a time, and they come to Cove with an unusual commission. They want a miniature replica, not a toy. A promotional model, accurate in every detail, so that sales representatives can demonstrate the machine's features to farmers without hauling the real thing into a barn. It will never sit on a shop shelf. No child will ever unwrap one. But it proves something that changes the direction of the company permanently. The economics of injection-molded scale models are extraordinary. If the numbers work when you give the object away, The margin when you charge for it is remarkable. The question becomes what to make and where to sell it. Both answers turn out to be the same: Woolworths. In 1952, Airfix releases its first commercial-scale kit. The Golden Hind, Sir Francis Drake's famous ship, sold through Woolworths stores across Britain in a simple polythene bag with a printed header card. The price is 2 shillings, not Cove's choice. Woolworths sets that ceiling and holds it without negotiation. 2 shillings is the number, and everything about the product, the bag instead of a box, the minimal printed instructions, the stripped-back packaging, every single decision flows from that constraint. In 1953, the Supermarine Spitfire Mark I follows. 2 shillings, Woolworths, polythene bag. Here is what those 2 shillings actually mean, because it is more important than it first appears. 2 shillings is the amount a boy might reasonably have in his pocket on a Saturday morning. Not a birthday gift, not a Christmas present requiring a parent's decision, just pocket money, spent independently at the Woolworths counter on this rather than on something else. That independence is everything. A child who spends his own money on something has chosen it. He owns it in a way that a gift never quite allows. He will come back next week and choose again. The brand does not need advertising when the transaction itself creates loyalty. Airfix does not aim at parents. It aims at children who can just barely afford to make the decision themselves. That is not a modest ambition. It is a radical one. The factory that would sustain that ambition for 3 decades stood on Haldane Place in Wandsworth, South London. It is not a building that announces itself. Industrial buildings rarely are. Large, low, functional, the kind of structure whose purpose is legible only from its scale. But step inside, and the scale of what happens there is immediately, physically apparent. The warmth hits you first. Not comfortable warmth. Working warmth, the heat generated by machines running in close proximity around the clock. Then the smell. Freshly molded plastic carries a particular quality, something between chemical sharpness and a strange synthetic sweetness. And once you have encountered it in quantity, you do not forget it. The workers who came off the night shift carried it home on their clothes. Every man who ever sat at a kitchen table building one of these kits carries a version of it somewhere in memory, though he may never have stood on this floor. The injection molds are precision-cut steel tools, each one the product of months of skilled toolmakers' labor. They are heated, filled with liquid plastic, cooled, and opened in a rhythm that does not slow for weekends or bank holidays. The machines run in rotating shifts. Every cycle drops a sprue tree onto the pile below it, a plastic branch hung with miniature components, each one waiting to be cut free and brought into relation with the others. Spitfire wings, Lancaster fuselage sections, the individual track links of a Tiger tank. At 1/72nd scale, a Merlin engine is no larger than a shirt button, and the surface detail is rendered with a precision that makes experienced toolmakers quietly proud. By the mid-1970s, the Haldane Place complex produces 20 million kits a year. 3/4 of every model kit sold in Britain carries the Airfix name. The operation runs across multiple shifts. The catalogue covers RAF and Luftwaffe aircraft, Royal Navy warships, ancient sailing vessels, Second World War armor, military figures in every theater of the conflict. The scale of it is genuinely staggering when you hold it in mind. Between 1964 and 1974, the box art is produced by a technical illustrator named Roy Cross, and his work is, by any serious assessment, exceptional. Cross does not produce illustrations. He produces arguments. A Spitfire at the apex of a hard banking turn, the pilot's expression just readable through the scratched perspex of his canopy. A Lancaster caught in the intersection of 2 searchlight beams over a city reduced to orange embers below. An aircraft carrier in a heavy Atlantic swell with flight deck crews moving against the roll of the ship. The compositions have the controlled energy of someone who understands both the history and the drama. And who knows that a 10-year-old will reach for the box because the lid alone makes the past feel urgent and real. In 1960, Airfix magazine launches alongside the kits, a monthly publication for the serious modeler, mixing construction technique with historical context, running for 2 decades. The annual Airfix catalogue becomes its companion piece, a printed document mailed to subscribers and sold in newsagents, studied with an intensity that most publications never earn. Boys circle the kits they intend to build, they cross-reference variants, they develop firm opinions about accuracy, they plan ahead. The catalogue is not advertising, it is a seasonal event. But beneath the success, something is beginning to go wrong. And it begins, as so many corporate failures do, with a board that looks at what is working and decides to do more of it somewhere else. The question successful companies always face arrives at Haldane Place in the early 1960s. The factory is running. The brand is trusted in every British household. The infrastructure that makes kits could surely make other things. The name that sells Spitfires could surely sell beyond the model shelf. In 1962, Airfix moves into slot car racing, launching a system designed to take on Scalextric directly. The Kitmaster railway range is absorbed, pulling the company into the territory Hornby and Triang have spent decades defending. Construction toys follow, action figures. And then, in 1971, Airfix acquires Meccano, the construction toy system invented in Liverpool and woven into British childhood almost as deeply as Airfix itself, along with Dinky, the die-cast vehicle range whose name alone carries generations of association. None of this expansion is irrational on its face. Airfix has the production capacity. It has the retail relationships. It has the name recognition. On paper, extending into adjacent toy categories should translate those advantages into proportionate new revenue. What the board does not reckon with is that the Airfix brand carries a specific promise to a specific customer. It means something precise. The boy who builds a Spitfire on Saturday morning is not looking for an Airfix action figure, and the boy who wants an action figure has no particular reason to trust Airfix to deliver it. Brand strength is not a general property that transfers automatically to whatever sits next to it. It is specific. Apply it to things that do not earn it, and you do not extend the brand. You dilute it. The financial consequence is structural. The kit business generates the revenue. That revenue is redirected to prop up divisions that cannot sustain themselves. Airfix Industries is quietly consuming the core that made everything else possible, and at precisely this moment, the founding family loses the financial cushion that might have absorbed what is coming. Nicholas Cove did not live to see the company fail, but his daughter Margaret, a significant figure in the Airfix corporate structure under her married name, becomes in the early 1970s one of the principal victims of an elaborate financial fraud known as the Cadco affair. The scheme was not simple, and it is worth understanding in some detail because the contrast with everything Airfix represented is almost too sharp to be coincidental. The Cadco affair was built around a food processing operation, or rather the meticulously maintained fiction of one. At its center were meat products, sausages recorded on ledgers, referenced in paperwork, used as the basis for financial collateral that had no physical existence whatsoever. The fraud worked because the documentation was convincing, because the people running it understood how institutional trust operates, and because investors who believed they were backing a real business had no easy means of verifying that the business was real. Margaret Elliott was among the primary victims. The money she lost was not recovered. And the loss mattered not just personally, but structurally, because the founding family's financial reserves represented a potential cushion for the company at a moment when the company was about to need one badly. What strikes me about the Cadco affair, looking back at it now, is the particular cruelty of its irony. A family that had spent decades making physical objects, things you could hold and build and keep, things whose existence was never in any doubt, was undone by a scheme whose entire architecture depended on things that did not exist at all. The opposite of everything the Haldane Place factory stood for. The opposite of a Merlin engine rendered at 1/72nd scale in grey polystyrene with the exhaust stacks in exactly the right place. The buffer was gone, and what was coming would require one, because 6,000 miles away, in a Japanese factory that had started out processing timber, a different kind of manufacturing revolution had already begun, and it was pointed directly at Haldane Place. The first sign appears on the shelves of British hobby shops in the mid-1970s. A new name alongside the familiar Airfix packaging. Japanese kits from a manufacturer called Tamiya, arriving at a higher price in heavier boxes and immediately distinguishable to anyone who handles them. Tamiya parts fit together without the filing and filling that Airfix builders had always accepted as part of the process. The surface detail is sharper. The panel lines are more consistent. The instructions are illustrated with diagrams rather than line drawings. The engineering is simply more precise. For the casual buyer, the boy spending his pocket money on a Saturday morning, none of this matters yet. Airfix is what he knows, what his older brother built, what his father introduced him to. The brand has a grip on him that no Japanese competitor has earned. But for the experienced modeler, the one who spends real money and whose opinion shapes what the next generation aspires to, the comparison visible on the shelf is not flattering to Airfix. And here is the thing about that comparison that the Airfix board never fully reckoned with. The serious modeler is not just a customer. He is the person who runs the model club, who writes to the hobby press, who staffs the shop counter on a Saturday afternoon and tells the 12-year-old standing in front of the display which kit is worth buying. He is the one whose enthusiasm or whose quiet disappointment travels downstream into the next generation of buyers. When he starts drifting toward Tamiya, he does not just take his own spending with him. He takes his influence. He takes the reputation he has been building for Airfix in every conversation he has had for the past decade. Brands in specialist markets do not die from the bottom up. They die from the top down. The casual buyer follows the serious one. He always does. By the time that movement shows up in the volume figures, the drift has been running for years. Revel Manufacturing in Germany adds further pressure from the European direction. Their kits occupy a quality tier that Airfix is finding increasingly difficult to match at the price points it has always defended. The volume numbers still favor Airfix. A market share approaching 3/4 in the mid-1970s is real, and it is not yet gone. But the premium end is moving, steadily and without drama, toward manufacturers who have invested in their tooling in ways that Haldane Place has not. In the hobby world, reputation travels ahead of revenue. By the time the sales figures show what is happening on the shelves, the moment to correct course has already passed. Then 1981 arrives, and it brings two things at once. The first is recession. Consumer spending contracts sharply. Household incomes shrink. The discretionary pocket money transaction that Airfix had built its entire commercial philosophy around becomes less frequent. The second is the pound. Between 1979 and 1981, driven by North Sea oil revenues and the tight monetary policy of the Thatcher government, sterling strengthens by something approaching 50% against the dollar. For a British consumer, that is an abstraction. For a British manufacturer selling into export markets, it is a catastrophe that arrives faster than any business can respond to. Airfix's overseas customers, in Europe, in North America, in Commonwealth markets that had been importing British kits for 30 years, face a price increase of nearly 50% on an identical product. The kits have not changed, the quality has not changed, the exchange rate has changed, and buyers with alternatives refuse the new terms. Export revenue does not decline, it collapses. In 1981, Airfix declares bankruptcy with debts of £15 million to its banking creditors. The British press treats it as a cultural event as much as a business story, because that is what it is. Airfix is not just a company. It is the object that defined Saturday morning for a generation. If it can fail, something permanent about British manufacturing has ended. What makes 1981 genuinely painful is that the kits are not the problem. The Spitfire mold is still producing clean, accurate parts on the day the receivers walk in. The Lancaster remains one of the finest scale kits produced at any price point. The product has not failed. It is destroyed by a currency movement that no export-dependent manufacturer could have absorbed. Craftsmanship is not the issue. The exchange rate is. The brand needs rescuing. Several rescuers will arrive. None will provide what is actually needed. And the first will actively make things worse. The rescue comes from Minneapolis, Minnesota. General Mills is one of the great American food corporations. Cheerios, Betty Crocker, Gold Medal Flour, a company that has spent decades turning grocery brands into household fixtures through a formula it has refined into something approaching a system. Identify the brand, understand the cost structure, remove the inefficiencies, improve the margin, make the numbers serve the strategy. Acting through Palatoy, its British toy subsidiary best known for Action Man, General Mills acquires Airfix out of bankruptcy. The reasoning presented in Minneapolis is not absurd. Consumer brands are consumer brands. The discipline that built Cheerios into a staple should transfer to a toy company with similar name recognition. What no boardroom in Minneapolis can account for is the nature of the relationship between Airfix and its customer. Building a kit is not a passive experience. It requires patience, attention, the willingness to work carefully through a process that punishes shortcuts. That quality is not a manufacturing inefficiency to be eliminated. It is the reason the product means what it means. Strip it out, and you do not have a cheaper Airfix. You have something that is no longer Airfix at all. General Mills strips it out. Cost reduction attempts meet resistance from the Haldane Place workforce. General Mills does not negotiate at length. Instead, it moves the operation. The injection molding machinery, the production equipment, and most critically, the molds themselves, the precision steel tools that represent everything Airfix knows and everything it has built, are disconnected from the factory floor, crated, and transported across the English Channel to the Miro Meccano facility in Calais, France. There is no managed closure, no consultation period, no final morning with the workforce gathered in the canteen. The machines are removed from the floor, and what remains is an empty building. Strip lighting over bare concrete, the ghost of machine bases still visible in the floor, the smell of warm plastic fading from the walls with each passing week. Haldane Place goes silent in 1981. It will not produce another Airfix kit. General Mills holds the brand for 5 more years, manufacturing continuing in France. Then in 1986, concluding that toy companies are not its concern and turning its attention back to breakfast cereal, it sells the brand on. And for one brief moment, the new owner looks exactly right. You know the name from the bedroom shelf. The small rectangular tin, the silver lid, the color number printed in a circle on the label. Humbrol 33, matte black. Humbrol 56, aluminium. Humbrol 19, bright red. The enamels that went on every Airfix kit that was ever built, applied with a fine brush at the kitchen table. The tins arranged in a row alongside the cement and the decal sheet. The two names belong together with the same logic as a lock and a key. In 1986, they are joined. Humbrol, based in Hull, acquires the Airfix brand from General Mills. The commercial case is the strongest of any ownership change in the company's history. The boy who buys the Lancaster kit buys Humbrol dark green for the upper surfaces and Humbrol brown for the interior. The same transaction, the same hands, the same Saturday. Bringing the brands under common ownership creates a complete model-making ecosystem, a single company that can serve a builder from the moment he cuts the first part from the sprue to the moment he applies the final coat of varnish. But Humbrol is itself owned by Borden Inc., an American chemicals and consumer goods conglomerate. The commercial logic belongs to Humbrol, the capital belongs to Borden, and Borden's capital does not move toward new Airfix tooling. Almost immediately, the molds are moved again. Out of Calais, where General Mills had placed them, and into a different French facility, the Heller SA factory in Troon, Normandy, which Borden judges better suited to run the operation. The molds have now crossed the Channel twice. Between 1986 and 1987, not a single new kit tooling is commissioned, 0. The range that had been releasing 17 new subjects a year at its creative peak produces nothing new. The catalogue that boys once studied like a document of intent, circling and annotating and arguing over, has nothing to add to itself. The brand that survived on novelty, on the annual arrival of new things to build and look forward to, goes entirely quiet. Production continues. The back catalogue keeps moving. But the stagnation of those 2 years is a signal that anyone paying attention can read clearly. This ownership structure will never provide what the brand actually needs. Humbrol saves the name. It does not save the direction. In 1994, Borden sells the entire hobby products portfolio, including both Humbrol and Airfix, to Allen & Maguire, an Irish private equity firm. Allen & Maguire have no manufacturing history, no background in the hobby industry, no particular relationship with the cultural weight of what they have acquired. What they have is a clear view of the balance sheet, a brand with strong name recognition, a manufacturing operation in France, and a catalogue that still generates sales. What a balance sheet cannot record is the memory of a Saturday morning, the weight of a kit box in a 10-year-old's hands, the specific satisfaction of getting a difficult assembly right after 2 failed attempts. None of that is a line item. None of it informs the calculation. 12 years pass. The Heller SA factory in Troon keeps producing kits. The business turns over. Nothing grows. Nothing is invested in at any meaningful scale. The gap between what Tamiya offers the serious modeler and what the Airfix range delivers quietly widens year by year without anyone appearing to notice or act. Then in August 2006, something happens that is entirely outside Allen & Maguire's control. Heller SA collapses. The supply chain for Airfix kits does not slow. It stops completely. There are no kits. There is no manufacturer. There is, in any practical sense, no business. On the 31st of August 2006, Humbrol enters administration. Airfix goes with it. The end of the model empire happens in Normandy, in a factory the company never owned. But the human reality of the collapse plays out in Hull. At the Humbrol paint facility, 31 of the 41 remaining workers are made redundant on the same day. They arrive for a normal shift. The production lines are running. The routine of the working day is intact. Then the administrators call, and by the end of the week the gates are padlocked shut. The last place in Britain where the name Airfix still carried operational meaning goes quiet on an ordinary Tuesday. No press release, no ceremony, a padlock. In 2008, the Hull building is demolished. The empire ends not with an announcement, but with 2 closures in 2 countries and a demolition crew 18 months later. Or so it seems. On the 10th of November 2006, 10 weeks after administration, Hornby plc announces it has acquired both Airfix and Humbrol. The purchase price is £2,600,000. Sit with that number. For the brand, for the full catalogue, for the intellectual property, for the mould still sitting in France, still capable of producing every kit subject that boys had ever circled in that annual document, for everything that remained of one of the most recognisable companies in British manufacturing history. £2,600,000 is what 30 years of inadequate ownership had reduced it to. Hornby knows what it is buying in a way that General Mills and Borden and Allen and Maguire did not. Hornby is itself a heritage toy brand whose own factory has long since closed, whose own manufacturing has long since moved abroad. It understands, from direct experience, what happens to a beloved British name when it is separated from the place that made it. That understanding may be why it moves when it does. What Hornby acquires for £2,600,000 is 4 of the most resonant names in British toy history: Airfix, Humbrol, Corgi, and Hornby itself. 4 institutions. Between them, not a single British factory. Under Hornby's stewardship, real improvements follow. New tooling is commissioned for the first time in over a decade. New subjects enter the development pipeline. KD technology produces toolings with a precision that the old manual methods could not consistently achieve, and by 2009, new kits are arriving in the range annually. The catalogue has something to offer again. For the first time in years, the modelling press has positive things to say about the direction Airfix is travelling. The new toolings draw favourable comparisons with what Tamiya and Revell have been doing, closing a gap that had been widening for the better part of 2 decades. It is not a complete recovery, but it is a genuine one, and it is the first genuine one since Haldane Place went dark. In 2013, Airfix Quick Build launches. A snap-together kit without glue or paint requirements, aimed at younger builders and at parents who want the Airfix name without the complexity that the name was built on. The ambition behind it is clear enough. If the traditional kit demands patience that fewer children are being taught to develop, then find a format that brings new hands to the brand without abandoning the heritage entirely. Whether it fully succeeds on those terms is a reasonable question. What it does unambiguously succeed at is something smaller and more significant. A British manufacturer called Plastico handles the tooling and injection moulding for the quick build range. For the first time since 1981, some Airfix production takes place on British soil. It is a modest fact, and nobody makes very much of it at the time. The scale bears no comparison to what Haldane Place once was. But the simple kits, the ones aimed at children who have never held a tube of polystyrene cement, are made in Britain. The serious kits are not. The Spitfire is still produced in India. The subjects that carry the full accumulated weight of what Airfix has always meant to the men who grew up with it. Designed in Britain, moulded abroad, sold in shops where they still reach out from the shelf in exactly the way Roy Cross intended. Hornby itself continues to navigate real financial difficulty. Operating losses, structural costs, a leisure market that looks almost nothing like the one in which a polythene bag containing a flat-pack galleon was the most desirable object on a Woolworths counter. The recovery is genuine. It is incomplete. And the question of whether the brand will ever find the stable, long-term ownership it has always needed remains, for now, unanswered. Stand on Haldane Place today. Part of the site is a business centre. Planning applications for residential development are working through the system. Within a few years, there will almost certainly be apartments where the night shift once ran. There is no plaque on the wall, nothing to indicate to anyone passing what this building was, or what it produced, or how many kitchen tables in how many countries received something made here. Close your eyes. Imagine the hiss and clamp of injection molding machines working through the small hours, the heat of a factory floor that never fully cooled between shifts, the sprue trees dropping in their thousands, each one carrying the parts of something that would end up on a kitchen table, assembled by careful hands and kept for decades. Imagine the lorries that came and took the machines away, the outlines left on the concrete floor, the silence where the sound had been for 30 years. Open your eyes. We did not lose Airfix because Britain fell out of love with it. The kits are still on the shelves, the Spitfire is still there, the box art still reaching for you before you have finished reading the label. But the people who owned this company across those critical decades had one thing in common. Every one of them could tell you exactly what Airfix was worth, the brand value, the catalogue depth, the market share figures, the licensing potential. Not one of them could tell you what it felt like to spend your own money for the first time on something you chose yourself. Not one of them had ever stood at a Woolworths counter on a Saturday morning with 2 shillings and made that decision. That is the thing they never understood. And that is what was lost.